I let it go after a while. A few years passed, and in college, I learned about this internet urban legend called lost episodes. People claim to have seen episodes of TV shows or altered versions of movies, usually animated, that contain graphic and disturbing content. The episode or movie was often found in unexpected places, and those claiming to have seen it often said it mysteriously disappeared. Whether through a VHS tape appearing to have somehow self erased, a website going dead immediately after viewing, etc. To be honest, I didn't put much stock in the validity of these stories, but with my Aristocats experience still back in my head, I decided to look further into it. I found a YouTube channel called Cartoon Geek who was discussing a certain lost episode for his 40,000 subscriber special. After going through the literary thanks and talking about how much his subscriber meant to him and all that, he began. Now, for those of you who are new to this channel, I'm just basically a guy obsessed with all things nostalgic and geeky about cartoons and other media. Most of my content is simply reviewing old cartoons and whatnot, usually superhero related. However, I also do a side series on the strange and the creepy side of animation. For example, my 20k subscriber special was a 3-part series on Disney and their alleged subliminal messages in films and television. And this video you're watching now is sort of in that same vein. We're going to be taking another look at a certain lost episode. For those who don't know, lost episodes are basically this urban legend about episodes of TV shows which were quote-unquote lost, as the name implies. These episodes are said to contain graphic and or disturbing and surreal elements and are generally regarded as material that the public was not meant to see. A few months ago, I covered an alleged lost episode from the 1968 filmation series, The Adventures of Batman. I loved this show as a kid, even though it was a few decades before my time, and there was one episode with a scene where Batman and Robin fall through a trapdoor set by the Joker and slide towards their doom. At the end of the slide tumble is a giant open furnace, looking like the Joker's face. Of course, since this is a kid's show, they don't actually slide into the furnace and burn alive. They get out with their gadgets. So, to recap, in 2009, this anonymous internet post started circulating online about an alleged lost version of the scene. In it, dynamic duo actually do slide into the furnace, burn alive, scream, and are shown graphically being burnt into a crisp, followed by surreal and non-linear scenes of grieving friends of Bruce Wayne in their mourning and the funeral service. Now, when I did my first video on this subject, I was honest with you guys. I didn't really think there was much credibility to the story. I like to keep an open mind on the show. But there were certain elements of the post that made me say, okay, this is probably bullshit. Like how the tape conveniently erased itself after the anonymous author viewed it. But since then, I've gotten a lot of comments and emails talking about how allegedly this lost episode has been posted online. Naturally, a lot of you are already saying this is fake, but this topic won the poll for this special, so let's find out. After some more preamble, the video cut the alleged lost episode. At the part where Batman and Robin are sliding down the tunnel towards the furnace, all the parts where the two used their belts gadgets to free were removed, and when the two were close to the furnace, the screen filled with fire and the two poor quality shrieks played. After that, There were some strange, abstract scenes, but all of them seemed to be simply random clips from other episodes with some editing effects thrown at them. Cartoon Geek returned. Okay, so right off the bat, Batman and Robin die off screen, which is obviously not what happened in the lost episode post that was shared around. They basically just used the flames from earlier in the scene and cut them over to make them look like Batman and Robin died, adding an it-can scream effect. The surreal scenes that follow are just so random clips from throughout the show that with the various editing tricks applied. I could have done some of them myself. So while this is impressive work, I think it's pretty clear that this is a fan project inspired by the anonymous posts. I'm going to have to rate this animation myth as debunked for now. He gave me a more breakdown and deconstruction of the clip before ending with some sort of promotional giveaway. What really got my attention, however, were some of the comments. There were at least a few people insisting that the lost episode was real and that they had seen it with their own eyes. I PM'd one of these people. I asked if he'd really seen the episode and about the circumstances. He responded within the hour. Yeah, I was at summer school, and during recess, I snuck off to the school's library's back room to be alone. I put a VHS of the cartoon that was there and saw it. But honestly, I wasn't really disturbed back then, since my parents let me watch R-rated horror movies and stuff back then, lol. But yeah, man, this thing is real. I asked if he knew any information about the other supposed lost episode phenomena, but he just said he did not. I did some research of my own. There were a few lost episode stories floating around on the internet, but mostly about children's show. To be honest, not many of them seemed all that credible. Still, I felt strongly that there was something real here, behind all the embellishment and fictionalization. I decided to see if there were any such stories surrounding the Aristocats. My search for disturbing content in the movie returned nothing but the expected, this one scene in the Aristocats totally scared me for life as a kid stuff, or more information about that Feliday movie. I tried reaching out to some of the credited animators, writers, and crew members, varying the content of my emails so as to cast as wide as a net possible. For example, some of my emails focused on disturbing content that may have been cut, while the other drafts were asked more generally about alternative versions or cut scenes. I also expanded my web searches. I used all the search engine tricks I could find and started using obscure and foreign language engines. After a few months of no information, no response to my email queries, I started to think that maybe I should just forget about the whole thing. Maybe my real memories of watching the Aristocats had merged with some nightmare I had to create my present memories, and maybe repeating those memories to myself so many times during my childhood had falsely convinced me of their reality. I was about to consign to this newfound self-closure when I was found something during one of my foreign language searches. It was a thread on a Chinese message board. The OP had a JPEG image and the text that roughly translated to Aristocats movie. Creepy? If I had coffee to drop and spill all over my computer, I would have. The image dashed away any hope I had of passing off my childhood experience as just a traumatic nightmare that just had stuck in my head longer than it should have. It was a frame from whatever twisted version of the Aristocats I had seen, and while I hadn't actually remembered this particular still until I found this message board. The instant I saw it, I remembered the clip, and more memories started flooding back. Still vague, but vivid and definitely real. I was now more firmly convinced than I had been ever before that that violent version of the movie was real. The image was of the Black Kitten, Berlioz. His face nearly filled the frame, and his eyes were wide and terrified, red veins bulging, his fur standing up as if it charged with electricity. The picture itself wasn't any more inherently disturbing than the grotesque fan art you can find for all kinds of different shows and movies. But unlike those other images, I knew this one had to be a genuinely sinister story of some kind behind it. As it haunted me like no other image ever had. There were only a couple of replies in the thread, which both of them were short, and neither of which were provided any more information about the image. I used Google Translate to try to ask the OP for more information, but never received a response. I performed a reverse image search of the file, but it returned no other results. However, a few weeks later, I finally got a reply to one of the emails I had sent to the production staff. The reply was to one of the emails I had written that hinted more strongly at the reality of what I had seen as a kid. The response was short and curt, but gave me new hope for finding answers. "Hello, sorry for the late response, but I read between the lines of your message. And if you've been seen what you were hinting at, you need to look at the Lost Media Group. That's all I'm going to say on the subject." I googled the Lost Media Group, but the closest thing I could ever find was a website for an online club called the Lost Media Society. It was a site for media enthusiasts to collect, trade, sell, buy, and discuss quote-unquote lost media, including lost episodes, as in real lost episodes that simply never aired, not the urban legend ones that contained surreal, disturbing, or even supernatural content. This community was interesting in its own right, and I became involved with it, eventually even becoming a site moderator. Once I was established as a respected regular, I decided to PM one of the head admins and ask him about the lost episodes legend. He responded that he had heard of it, but it wasn't really something the site dealt with. He recalled that in the past and had been talked about it, and some even had suggested banning discussions about it since it was seen as a spam topic after a while. I asked if he knew about an organization called the Lost Media Group. He said that he had heard of it, but he didn't know anything about it, and suggested that I should contact a certain other admin who did know about this entry. I messaged this admin and got a response within the hour. He told me that the Lost Media Group was the group alleged by some to be behind the lost episodes phenomenon. According to him, they produce not just altered versions of movies and television episodes, but were also said to make their own versions of other media, such as video games and comic books. He said he did not know much else about them other than that some lost media collectors were willing to pay some large sums for an authentic work by this group, and that before the Lost Media Society had banned discussions of the Lost Episodes legend, some of these collectors had asked about them on the site. I asked if he could refer me to such a collector. He said, my best bet would be a certain retired site admin who was no longer active in the Lost Media Society. He linked me a couple of archived threads by this individual asking about lost episodes and gave me the man's email address. I shot him an email asking about his interest in lost episodes, and even went as far to directly if he knew about a lost episode type version of the Aristocats. A few months went by with no response. During this time, I researched as much as I could about lost episodes. I found out about another alleged lost episode of The Flintstones. The story behind this episode was much like other lost episode stories. A special episode of the show that aired on an otherwise unused television channel and had gory and surreal content. The main difference between this story and the others is that this one had a somewhat credible outside source. The original forum post had a link to the digitally archived local news article from 1979. The FCC had received multiple complaints from dozens of people claiming to have seen the episode. The complaints came from the Lake Kabagama region of Minnesota, with most originating from a couple of specific lake resorts. The incident was locally known as the Kabagama broadcast. I decided the next logical step was to contact the FCC for more details. They responded within a week, saying that they were not at liberty to give out such information. At that moment, I considered filing a Freedom of Information Act request, but decided to take a different route. One of the two lake resorts most heavily involved within the incident was still in operation. I scheduled a vacation from work, and a few weeks later, I was on my way to Lake Kabagama. Kleck's Cove was a collection of 15 cabins, a bar restaurant, and a small boat dock with boats available for lease. I had rented an old A-frame unit and planned to stay for 2 weeks. The resort was a nice place to stay. I spent a few days fishing and seeing local attractions. I fell in with a group of regulars who fished at the resort every year. We went on several boat trips before I had enough courage to ask the oldest of them about the Kabagama incident, about the Kabagama broadcast. Oh, that funny thing. I actually just missed out on that whole thing. It happened a week before I stayed here in the summer of '79. I heard a lot about it, though. You'll want to talk to Ed about it. He was there. He was referring to Ed Kleck, the founder and proprietor of Kleck's Cove. I had considered asking him about the Kabagama broadcast before, but wanted to feel out the locals first. However, at this point, I decided I was being overly cautious and chose to follow the man's advice. Mr. Kleck was in his late 70s, but his memory was still sharp. He liked to tell stories, and I took advantage of this by starting a conversation with him about the history of the resort and the lake. This got him going for a couple hours before I brought up the Kaba Gama broadcast. Now, why do you want to know about that? He asked, seeming taken aback. I told him that I read about it on the internet and what the story said. He shrugged and said, "Oh well, that's pretty much what happened. Nothing much else to really tell, really." I asked if he had seen the episode, to which he responded that he had caught the end of the broadcast after being told about it was happening. He said he saw Barney die a horrible and bloody death in some Fox Stone Age contraption, but didn't remember much else. He was reluctant to continue with the conversation much further, but assured me that the incident was very real indeed. I pondered all I had learned on my drive home. I had been left with more questions than answers and didn't seem to be getting any closer to the tracking down the Aristocats' lost recording. The more I learned, the more new questions came up. Was the disturbing Aristocats version I had seen connected to the Kabagama broadcast or the alleged Batman and Robin lost episode? Or was I making connections to where there were none? Did that person on YouTube who claimed to have seen the Batman lost episode really see it, or had he just been trolling me? Surely all these claims shouldn't be coincidental, but there was no explanation for the existence of these lost episodes. I was churning all this information all over in my mind. I didn't notice the vehicle behind me until it was right up on my bumper. I swerved as it made contact and careered into a ditch. The other car drove on without stopping. I wasn't injured. In fact, my airbag wasn't even deployed, but I sat in shock for many, many minutes afterward. When I finally got my bearings, I called 911 and told them about my location based on the nearest marker. It took about 45 minutes for a state officer to find me. I told the police what had happened, but wasn't able to provide details such as the make and color of the car that had just hit me, or the license plate. I did not tell them what business I was on or lingering my suspicions of that the incident had to do with my investigation of the Kabagama broadcast.